And I think what President Trump's argument is that if these people nonetheless are supposed to be our friends and our allies, put NATO aside, he thinks of them as our friends. If during our time of...
Wait, does Trump think of them as our friends?
I think the United States as a whole...
He leaked texts with the Prime Minister of Norway?
I think the United States as a whole does. I think President Trump personally thinks that our allies probably need to be maybe...
He treats them like enemies and he treats Russia like allies.
On Abby Phillip's Table for Five, Adam Mockler debates MAGA apologists Noah Rothman and Brianna Lyman, with Jamal Simmons weighing in. The panel examines Trump's leadership, his approach to allies, and the contradictions in his strategy. I'll share key insights as we watch, and I want to hear from you. What stands out to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments.
Let's roll it.
As the war against Iran enters its fourth week, the pressure is mounting on Donald Trump economically, politically, domestically, and globally. Thousands more U.S. Marines and sailors are heading toward the Middle East in what is likely to be a treacherous mission. The president faces the danger of losing control of the war after Israel struck a gas field that he claimed he wasn't aware of. He's facing tensions with allies after he says that they refused his help in the war. He's facing rising gas prices at home, along with higher inflation and lower markets. He's asking for money for a war that is not popular with Americans and a price tag not popular with Republicans. He's facing criticism from many of his own supporters for what they say are broken promises. And all of this is coming as primaries and campaigns are heating up for the midterm elections. This is a Trump administration that is in a perilous moment, whether you agree or disagree with this war. Their decisions from this point forward could really matter not just for how the war progresses, but also the politics of it for the Republicans this year in the midterms.
Oh, we're talking not about the midterms. We're talking about history. This is an epochal war. On the other side of it, we don't know what that looks like. But it will not be the world that existed on February 27th. An entire new world exists for us after this. And the president seems as calm and at peace and steadfast and resolute as I have ever seen him, including with tariffs. How he responded when he introduced those tariffs on Liberation Day in 2025 was very erratic. And he was easily moved by the polls and by pressure from Republicans and pressure from the markets.
You think so?
Oh yeah, he responded to the markets within weeks. The markets have been moving here in ways that the president is not reacting to.
Okay, all right. Well, I will agree to disagree on that one. I'm not sure that he. I think he tried to stick by his guns on a lot of the tariffs, for example. But on this, I mean, you're right. It's going to be incredibly significant what he does. But every day we're getting a different story from Donald Trump about what he is doing.
We're not even quite sure that Donald Trump and Israel are on the same page. It doesn't seem like it. I'm glad you brought up the tariffs as well, because when they announced the tariffs, they said this is short-term pain for long-term gain. That was like 14 months ago, 12 months ago, and we're still in the short-term pain part. When are we going to enter the long-term gain part? Because tariffs imposed a $1,000 tax on American families in 2025. Now this war is spiking the price of oil, spiking the price of gas, spiking everything, and the economy is suffering. Now we're entering week 4 of this war that Trump said would be 4 to 6 weeks, and we're sending thousands of new troops to the Middle East, meaning probably take about a week for them to get there.
I think it might take a lot longer.
Longer than a week. So that means we're going to blow through this 4 to 6 week timeline. We're experiencing major mission creep already. Before we even reach this, mission creep is when the size, scope, and scale of the mission slowly expands. We experience in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I'm very worried that's going to happen now.
Just briefly to respond to you, I agree. I will say that I don't think the president and his subordinates have said as early and often as they should, because that's a messaging operation. Say it again and again and again until everybody can repeat it. Exactly what the purpose of this war is and why it was necessary. But the purpose of this war, as they have said, perhaps not to my satisfaction,
with frequency,
a lot of things. But nevertheless, no, they have said that we need to degrade and eliminate Iran's capacity to project power abroad. And when they project power abroad, they kill Americans. We've gotten really good at interdicting the amount of effort that the Iranians put into killing us. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of personnel. It's one of the reasons why we can never execute the pivot to Asia. On the other side of this war is the possibility of another world without the Islamic regime.
Wait a minute.
Without the foremost sponsor of Islamist terrorism in North America, in Europe, in Latin America. And yes, it is a national security issue, whether or not Israel is on the same page with us, because the American people are under threat every day.
If we achieve
that threat is a value.
So just think, you might be right. It might be that eliminating Iran was the most important thing. The question I have is why, if that's true, why didn't the president take the time to try to woo the American people, to get them onto his side, to build a coalition with our allies, to get them onto our side, so we could go out and actually we could prosecute this war with our country being behind it, and our allies standing with us. Instead, what we have is a president who seems to only know how to use the sticks these days. He doesn't know how to use the carrots. And so we are at this point where it seems like we're making it up as we go, and he's upset because he can't get anybody else in the world to join us. But he's been talking trash about them for 18 months.
Here's what he wrote about NATO on Friday. He said, without the USA, NATO is a paper tiger. They didn't want to join the fight to stop a nuclear-powered Iran. He calls them cowards, and he says, we will remember. I think the question that comes up for me is that doesn't seem like a message that's written from a position of strength. If you have allies, treaty allies, that you then have to turn around and insult and reprimand and all of that stuff because you couldn't convince them to come along with you on something, that seems like a sign of weakness.
I think it actually is the opposite. It's
How
the
is
fact
it a sign? How does
let me
it show
finish my
strength
answer.
that he
It's the fact
doesn't,
that he's willing
that he can't
to
get NATO to come along with him?
First of all, it's the fact that he's willing to lose our allies because they so much don't contribute to our own efforts that he says, we don't need it. Take it or leave it. If we have them, great. If we don't have them, we don't need them. Second of all, when it comes to NATO, this is an organization that had never funded appropriately their own share of the burden. And they have been pissed at Donald Trump since the day he came down that escalator because he has wanted them to pay for their fair share. Last but not least, look, the Strait of Hormuz is not just beneficial to the United States, okay? Europe is also benefiting from it, right? Sulfur travels through that Strait of Hormuz. That sulfur then goes to Africa for farming. It goes to Europe for farming. They also need to hope and pray that that thing can open. So the fact that right now the United States has done a lot of the bulk work and is saying, can you guys now come and step up because you are our allies? Should you not help us when we need some help?
We're doing the bulk work of a war that we started?
But we're not
started a war
picking sides.
because Iran started a war 47 years ago. We're finishing the war.
Wait, we
So
started.
we're not picking sides for backyard soccer here, right? What we're doing is we're trying to figure out.
On Abby Phillip's panel, Adam Mockler methodically pushes back against MAGA commentators like Noah Rothman and Brianna Lyman, who consistently frame Iran as an immediate existential threat to the United States. They lean heavily on Iran's history of hostility and its role as the world's leading sponsor of terrorism, presenting this as the primary justification for aggressive military action. Lyman repeatedly invokes the 47-year problem talking point, suggesting that only now, under Trump, has decisive action been taken, while implying that previous presidents were too timid or cautious to act. Mockler dismantles this narrative, highlighting the glaring contradictions in their logic. He points out that the administration claims an urgent, imminent nuclear threat, yet just months ago, it asserted that Iran's nuclear capabilities had been thoroughly neutralized. Despite this, MAGA pundits insist the situation demands immediate, drastic military intervention. There was never a comprehensive strategic plan before escalation, and none appears to exist now. What is presented as an emergency is in reality a reactive series of decisions that expose gaps in planning and threaten U.S. credibility abroad. Mockler emphasizes that leadership is more than bold declarations or hyperbolic rhetoric. It requires foresight, coalition building, and transparent communication. Simply declaring a crisis and expecting allies and the public to follow along is not responsible governance. The contradictions in the MAGA framing, alarmist claims paired with a lack of coherent strategy, reveal a troubling pattern: reactive decision-making dressed up as decisive action. By breaking down these arguments, Mockler illustrates a critical truth. Effective leadership in global affairs demands both strategic clarity and moral accountability. Without them, even actions framed as courageous can become reckless, endangering both U.S. interests and global stability.
How do we wage a war? And that means you got to bring people along with you onto your side. And so the question is, why are they just now figuring this out? I don't. There is no answer to that question. Why didn't we spend the time that we spent? And those of us who are old enough to remember going into Iraq, right?
Right.
Before that, George Bush, even though I disagree with it, but he had a mounted campaign going to United Nations, talking to the American people, stories in the newspapers. So the American public was on board with
Coalition,
that.
coalition of the willing. I mean, look, it's been 47 years. What's a few more months getting allies on board?
Well, I'll tell you, this was an emergency exigency. This wasn't an 8-month build-up.
Was it?
Yes, it was. Because after Midnight Hammer, we had evidence, and I think the administration
Tulsi Gabbard said the opposite this week
that they
in her
had
testimony.
that they had evidence that they were not.
She said,
that they had evidence that they were not developing their nuclear program. What they have said, because they lack the resources to get that material out of the lightly irradiated tons of rubble that it's under, what they said is that they're building it with more speed and alacrity than we can build interceptors, ballistic missiles. And this was an emergency buildup because of the protests in December and January. That happened out of the blue.
Listen,
and then we got the regime that appeared weak.
That ballistic missiles alone are a justification for war with Iran is not even an argument that this administration is making.
They make it all the time.
They were making the case.
Yesterday.
They were making the case that Iran was a nuclear threat and that we would never let them have a nuclear weapon. Their ballistic missile capability was not such that nobody has argued that it could reach the homeland. There's no argument of that.
They're making.
Israel has been and remains in the zone of danger. But I guess I don't know that if you were to take that to the American people and say, Iran was building conventional weapons, ballistic missiles, and we need to go to war with them for the first time in 47 years. I'm not sure that would be a winning argument, which is why they weren't making it.
They started making it again. Right before the war, but during the war and afterwards. And the argument is very clear that this is a missile capability that will deny us access so that we can't do another Midnight Hammer without experiencing unacceptable losses and maybe not achieving our mission results. The reason why this happened in 2 months is because we had a window of opportunity. The intelligence was there to hit their leadership, and we decimated their leadership. The regime was weaker than it had ever been, experiencing the worst protests they had ever seen. It wasn't an 8-month buildup, and it's looking like an exigency, an emergency contingency operation, because that is what it is.
The contradictions here are endless. So in one breath, this is a 47-year war. It's been going on for 47 years. In the next breath, there was an imminent threat coming from Iran. And then the next breath, oh, we were just trying to defang their nuclear capabilities. And then one person will say, oh, we did defang the Iranian regime. But then Trump is now mobilizing thousands of more troops. So obviously this is going to be elongated and continue to happen. Here's a timeline regarding the Strait of Hormuz as I see it, because you guys were talking about it. Donald Trump claimed that he was going to assemble a group, a coalition, if you will, of powerful countries to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. He then realized, oh wait, the same international community that I have been antagonizing for the past 2 years isn't going to want to go on a suicide mission through the Strait of Hormuz, which at its most narrow navigable shipping lane is 2 miles right off the coast of Iran. They can just lob missiles over. So it's a suicide mission. He realizes, wait, they're not going to help me with that. And then the countries themselves say, we're not going to join a war we didn't even start. And then when I come on this panel, you guys are like, oh, these countries don't want to help us finish the job. They didn't start the job. They didn't start any of this.
So why are they our allies?
Because we are a coalition.
Do they all get like veto power when President Donald Trump does?
NATO is a defensive coalition meant to defend countries. Article 5 is invoked when one is attacked. Article 5 is not invoked when we attack a country. That is a fundamental axiom of NATO.
Right. And I think what President Trump's argument is that if these people nonetheless are supposed to be our friends and our allies, put NATO aside, he thinks of them as our friends. If during our time of...
Wait, does Trump think of them as our friends?
I think the United States as a whole...
He leaked texts with the Prime Minister of Norway?
I think the United States as a whole does. I think President Trump personally thinks that our allies probably need to be... maybe
he treats them like enemies and he treats Russia like allies.
By force, if necessary. We threaten to take property from one of our allies.
The funniest part about it is none of our allies could do a damn thing about it if he actually took Greenland.
You know what? Here's the thing. This is a question. This is not a question of. I mean, if it were just a question of who's stronger and who's not, then yeah, what would be the point of alliances? But it is a question of leadership. And again, I mean, as we were talking earlier about the president's inability to actually develop a coalition for something that presumptively is in the global interest, that seems to me like the clearest sign of the weaknesses of their ability to convince not just us in the layman world, but these are other countries they can share intelligence with of the actual objectives of this conflict.
Yeah, I actually don't begrudge any European power that's a little miffed at how they've been treated over the last year, especially since they've been hearing from the Pentagon NATO should be an in-theater operation. Right. The alliance should be acting in Europe's interest and only in Europe, and then all of a sudden the administration comes around and says, hey, why don't you help us in West Asia? At the same time, however, we need their ships as escorts, not to conduct combat operations, to just be there. We have an ally that in this fight, which is the most capable, it's the most capable combat operation. It's not a suicide mission.
We got to leave it there.
Adam Mockler's critique of Brianna Lyman's points highlights a recurring and dangerous pattern with Donald Trump: the combination of bluster, grievance, and a lack of strategic awareness. Mockler emphasizes how Trump positions himself as the aggrieved party, constantly asking why allies aren't coming to his aid, all while ignoring the fact that his own behavior has systematically alienated these partners over many years. Public insults, undermining diplomacy, and a disregard for long-standing alliances have left the United States isolated in situations where cooperation is crucial. Lyman's quip about Greenland, suggesting that no one could stop Trump if he decided to act unilaterally, underscores the absurdity of this mindset. Trump acts as if he can dictate outcomes on the world stage, yet he seems shocked when allies don't comply or rush to his side. Mockler points out the fundamental hypocrisy. You cannot dismantle relationships and then expect unwavering loyalty when situations go wrong. Even Trump defenders like Noah Rothman, while offering partial defenses, tacitly admit how unreasonable this position is. Mockler goes further, framing Trump's behavior not just as mismanagement, but as a reflection of authoritarian admiration. Trump openly admires strongmen such as Vladimir Putin and Benjamin Netanyahu, leaders known for manipulation, strategic coercion, and consolidation of power. This admiration shapes his approach. Impulsive decisions, prioritizing personal ego and adulation over coalition building or thoughtful diplomacy. The influence of advisors like J.D. Vance compounds the problem, introducing exclusionary, nationalist rhetoric under the guise of protecting Western civilization, while simultaneously dismissing cooperative engagement with allies or multilateral institutions. Mockler paints a stark picture of global risk resulting from this approach. High-stakes decisions are made impulsively, sometimes triggered by a single meeting with a foreign leader, without a coherent plan or understanding of long-term consequences. The Strait of Hormuz is a prime example. It is not just a critical oil passage, but also a lifeline for fertilizers and other materials essential for feeding millions worldwide. Mismanaging this choke point doesn't just affect energy markets. It disrupts global food supply chains, trade, and international economic stability. According to Mockler, there is little evidence that Trump or his team fully understood these stakes before escalating conflicts or deploying additional troops. The broader lesson is clear. Effective leadership requires far more than bold statements, theatrics, or unilateral action. Military, economic, and diplomatic power carries immense responsibility, and without foresight, strategy, or coalition building, the consequences ripple across the globe. Mockler frames this as a call for accountability, transparency, and principled governance, showing that the costs of impulsive leadership extend far beyond domestic politics. They threaten global stability, international trust, and the safety of ordinary people worldwide. Finally, Mockler challenges viewers to engage critically. Are these isolated lapses in judgment, or do they reflect systemic issues in decision-making at the highest levels of power? The discussion isn't just about partisan politics. It's about leadership, responsibility, and the consequences of wielding immense power without the strategy and foresight required to safeguard both the United States and the international community. By reflecting on these patterns and speaking up, citizens play a role in demanding accountability and ensuring that global leadership is exercised wisely, strategically, and ethically.